"Morning." The word came from the janitor by the far door, a single syllable offered into the dark, the way it was offered every day. And the woman at the platform answered it with the small nod of someone who had heard it in 100 gyms on 100 bases and understood it for the quiet sacrament it was. 06, the strength bay of the base gym held the particular stillness that belongs only to the hour before the world arrives. Cold rubber underfoot, the smell of iron and old chalk. One bank of lights humming overhead like something patient and half asleep. The rest of the installation was still gray at its edges. Out past the windows, the sky had not decided yet what kind of day it would be. Inside, in that pool of humming light, the woman set her chalk on the ledge and began, unhurried, to load a bar. She had a face that the years had not so much aged as clarified, the way weather clarifies stone, taking away everything soft and leaving only what was meant to last. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes, from a career of squinting into hard sun in hard places, and a stillness in her that most people never acquire. The stillness of someone who had long ago stopped needing anything from a room in order to be all right in it. She was in her late 40s, dark hair pulled back and going quietly silver at the temple, a plain sleeveless shirt, the kind of body that has been kept strong on purpose for a very long time, rather than built for a mirror. There was nothing about her that announced anything. A visitor at the door would have taken her for a veteran keeping the promise a lot of veterans keep to the iron, or for a coach, or for no one at all. That was the truth of her, most mornings. No one at all. The gym at dawn is a church for the people who keep promises to themselves, and she had kept this one for 30 years. There is a kind of person who is made in that hour and by that hour, and she was one of them. The dawn does not care who you were yesterday or what anyone thinks you are. It offers you a bar and a floor and the plain arithmetic of load and effort, and it gives back exactly what you put in, no more and never less. And there is a great cleanliness in that. After a life spent in places where effort and reward had come uncoupled, and good men had died for reasons no ledger could balance. She came here for the cleanliness. She came here because the iron told the truth, and after 30 years, she had come to trust very few things that told the truth as reliably as a loaded bar told it at 6 in the morning in an empty room. The lights hummed. The rubber held the night's cold a little longer than the air did. Somewhere, a fan turned over and moved the smell of chalk in a slow circle around the bay. When she chalked her hands, the ink showed. Faded now, the way ink fades on skin that has spent a career in the sun. A dark shape on the forearm running up under the sleeve toward the shoulder, worn soft at its edges, unreadable at a glance and unexplained. She did not tug the sleeve down over it. She did not tug the sleeve up to show it. It simply lived on her arm the way a scar lives, a thing that was there because it had earned the right to be there, and she reached past it for the bar as if it were part of the hand. The bar came off the floor like it weighed nothing. It didn't weigh nothing. It weighed more than most of the men who would walk through those doors in an hour could touch, but it rose in one clean, unhurried line, her breath even, her spine flat, the plate settling at the top with the soft ring of steel that has been handled correctly, and then it came back down under control. No drop, no drama, and she stood over it, and breathed, and did it again. At the far rack, a master sergeant named Ansel Rourke set a paper coffee cup on the ledge and pretended to stretch. Rourke was 44 and a dawn regular himself, one of the quiet fraternity of men who came to the iron in the dark because the dark asked nothing of them. He had nodded to this woman for a week and never spoken. He nodded now into the middle distance and went back to his own bar and thought nothing in particular, and the day began to arrive. It arrived as it always did, all at once, on young legs. The training company flooded in for their session a little after 0630. 40 recruits, loud with the specific loudness of the very young and the very new. And the still church of the Strength Bay became a locker room. Among them was a recruit named Brody Tanner, 19 years old, quick and cocky and hungry for the laugh, the kind of young man who is confused being unafraid with being right. He clocked the older woman at the platform, and he clocked the faded ink on her arm, and in the 2 seconds it took him to decide what she was, he decided wrong. He nudged his buddy, a recruit named Emery Nash, and he grinned, and he said it loud enough to carry. "Did you draw that yourself?" Nash laughed. A couple of others near him laughed. The woman finished loading her bar. There is a particular sound a young man makes when he has decided, in the safety of a crowd, that someone is beneath him. A bright, carrying, careless sound, pitched to travel, built to be heard by everyone except the person who is meant to be wounded by it. Tanner made that sound. He had made it before, in other rooms, at other people, and it had always worked, because the world had so far arranged itself to reward him for it. And 19 is exactly old enough to mistake a lucky streak for a law of nature. She did not look up, and she did not look away, and she did not answer, because 30 years had taught her a thing the boy did not know yet, which is that the loud ones always tell on themselves if you give them the quiet in which to do it. She chalked her hands again. The white dust drifted down through the humming light and settled on the dark old ink like the first snow of a season. And she set her feet, and she reached for the bar. A recruit laughed at a quiet woman's faded ink, and the woman only chalked her hands because she had stood in far worse rooms than this one, in far worse country, and had learned exactly what silence is worth. The morning went the way she meant it to go, which is to say she let the iron do the talking and said nothing at all. She worked through her sets the way water works through stone, without hurry and without stopping, and the number on the bar climbed, plate by plate, past what 40 19-year-olds had assumed a woman her age could touch, past what most of them could touch, until the bar carried more than Tanner had ever pulled in his life, and she moved it like a thing she was merely tidying away. Her breathing never changed. That was the tell, though none of them could have named it. The absolute economy of her. Nothing spent that did not need spending. Every motion the shortest line from the floor to the top and back. A control so complete it looked like ease, and was in fact the opposite of ease. Was in fact a lifetime of discipline worn smooth. The ink wrote on her forearm through all of it, half covered, sweat shined, and she never once explained it, and never once hid it. Across the bay, Tanner set up to pull. He loaded the bar heavy, heavier than his form could carry, because there was an audience now, and an audience is a kind of gravity all its own. He bent to it with his back rounded like a question mark, his weight out over his toes. Everything about the setup a small, quiet promise of an injury waiting for its moment. She stepped over. She did not make it a lecture. She made it 4 seconds, and a low voice, the voice you use on a young animal you do not want to spook. Flat back, bar over the middle of your foot. You'll keep your spine that way for 40 years. It was, if he had known it, the kindest thing anyone said to him all week, and it came from the person he had spent the week mocking. She was not correcting him to win. She was correcting him because she had spent a career watching strong young men wreck themselves on their own egos, on a rounded back and a heavy bar and a need to be seen, and because some old reflex in her could not watch a 19-year-old set himself up for a lifetime of pain and say nothing. The instinct to protect the young from their own foolishness did not switch off just because the particular young fool had called her ink a mall costume. That was the thing about her the boy could not have understood. Her care was not a reward you earned by being kind to her. was simply what she was, all the way down, whether you deserved it or not. Tanner looked at the older woman correcting his lift, and he did the thing that 19 does when it is embarrassed in front of its friends. He waved her off, muttered something, turned his shoulder to her. And she let it go, because she does not fight boys. She warns them once, and lets the warning stand where they can find it later. And she went back to her own bar and left him to the setup that would one day put him on a surgeon's table. There was a thing she knew about strength that the boy would spend years learning, if he was lucky enough to learn it at all. Strength is not the noise you make lifting. Strength is the silence you keep. It is the plate you add without announcing it, the set you finish without a witness, the years you put in when no one is clapping and no one is filming, and there is nothing at the end of it but you and the bar and the honest weight of the thing. The loudest lifter in a room is almost never the strongest, and the strongest is almost always the one you did not notice until she reached for a bar that 4 men could not move, and moved it like she was setting a table. That was her. That had always been her. She had made a whole life out of being underestimated by people who mistook her quiet for weakness, and she had buried a number of louder men who had made the same mistake at higher stakes. At the far rack, Ansel Rourke had stopped stretching. He stood with his forgotten coffee going cold in his hand and watched the woman at the platform, and he could not have told anyone why she held his eye. Only that she moved the way certain people he had known once had moved, in the worst and best year of his life, a long way from here, where the stakes had been considerably higher than a personal record. It was a shape of motion he had not seen in a long time. It pulled at something in him he had spent 16 years learning to keep folded and put away. A master sergeant stared a beat too long at a woman he could not place and could not look away. By the third dawn, the joke had a name, because a joke always finds a name. That is the cruelty of a crowd of the young. It does not need to be right. It needs only to be easy. And mockery is the easiest currency there is. Someone called her the Crayon Lady for the faded ink, and someone else improved it to Mall Ninja, and the names moved through the training platoon the way names move through people who are frightened and far from home and grateful for anyone lower than themselves to stand on. She heard both of them. She heard them the way you hear weather through a wall, and she let them pass, and she kept her routine, because the routine was hers and the names were not. Tanner grew the bit. He had a performer's instinct for what landed, and the woman landed, and so he did an impression of her lifting, the set jaw, the slow breath, the ink, and he did an impression of her silence, which is a hard thing to mock, and which he mocked anyway. And Nash egged him on, and the mornings became a small theater with the woman at the platform as the unwitting star. There is a mercy in what she did not do that the room could not see. She could have ended the boy with a sentence. She had, in her arm, the fact that would have turned the whole platoon's laughter to ash in an instant, and she carried it around all week like a round in the chamber and never once fired it, because firing it would have been about her, and because a truth spent to win an argument is a truth wasted. She was not there to win the mornings. She was there to keep a promise. The mornings would sort themselves out, as mornings do, and the boy would either grow out of the sound he made, or he would not, and either way, it was not hers to fix with a word thrown down in front of an audience. She racked her weights. She squared the bar. She left without a word, and every dawn she came back, which is its own kind of answer, if anyone in that gym had been old enough to read it. Rourke read it. Rourke pulled Tanner aside once, low, no audience, the way you try to do a young man a kindness he will not understand. "Ease off, recruit," he said. "You don't know what you're looking at." Tanner, riding a week of laughs, brushed it off. "Some old lady's tattoo," he said. "Relax, Master Sergeant." And Rourke looked at him a moment and let it go, and walked away troubled, because a man who will not be told is a man who has to be shown, and being shown is always more expensive than being told. They were laughing at ink they could not read. If that is tightening your jaw, you are not the only one. Subscribe to Honor Tales, because there is one man in that gym who can read it, and he is about to. The exclusion, when it came, wore the face of a good man doing his job. Staff Sergeant Marius Vogt was the training company's senior drill instructor, 33 years old, squared away and serious, and he was not cruel. He heard the friction around the older woman at the platform, the names, the performance, the small daily circus of it, and he did what a drill instructor does with friction, which is remove it from the path of the mission. The mission was 40 recruits and a limited window of platform time, and so Vogt walked over to the woman one morning and told her, correctly and courteously, that the strength platforms were reserved for the training company during these hours, and that she would need to clear them for the recruits. He was right. By the letter of the facility schedule, he was entirely right. He was also entirely wrong, in the way that the letter of a thing can be right, and the whole of it can be wrong at the same time, and the room read it as a victory for Tanner. She did not argue. Arguing is for people unsure of the ground beneath them, and she had never in her life been unsure of that. She stepped back from the platform, but before she left it, she did the thing she always did, the thing 30 years had built into her, below the level of thought. She racked every plate, stripped the bar, squared it on the rack, and cleaned the chalk from the platform, hers and the recruits both, so that the space she surrendered was cleaner than the space she had been given. It is a small thing, cleaning up a platform. It is the kind of small thing that tells you everything, if you have lived long enough to know where to look. A person's character is not in the large gestures that have an audience. It is in the small ones that do not, in what they do with the 2 minutes when no one is watching and nothing is at stake, and there is no reward for doing it right, except the doing of it. She stripped the bar and squared the rack and swept the chalk, because that was who she was when no one was keeping score, and she had been that person so long that being anything else would have felt like wearing someone else's skin. Vogt watched her do it. He did not know what it meant, but he knew that no poser he had ever met left a platform better than they found it. He filed it away, the way careful men file away the things that do not fit the story they have been handed. The gym staff posted a note. Her dawn window was quietly taken from her, and the recruits noticed that the crayon lady had been moved along, and Tanner wore it like a medal. A lesser person would have fought it. A lesser person would have found the rule that gave her every right to that platform, and produced it, and stood on it, and made the drill instructor and the gym staff and the whole training company understand exactly who had been moved along. She had that rule. She had, in fact, a great deal more than that rule. But she had learned somewhere in the long middle of her career that being right is cheap and being effective is expensive, and that the loudest way to win a small thing is very often the surest way to lose the large one. The large thing here was not her platform time. The large thing was the boy, and the platoon, and the lesson that was coming, and none of that would be served by a master gunnery sergeant pulling rank over a squat rack at dawn. She did not escalate. She simply moved her lift to 05, an hour earlier than the rule, into the deepest part of the dark, and she kept her promise to the iron in an empty bay with the lights still off over half the room. Even there, alone, unwatched, with no audience to perform for, and no one to correct. The control was exactly the same. The flat spine, the even breath, the bar rising like a thing she was merely lifting out of her own way. They had moved her off the platform and believed they had won, and she was the calmest early riser on the entire installation. Ansel Rourke could not let it sit. It was not in the man to let it sit. The ink had snagged something in him and would not let go, and so he began, without quite admitting it to himself, to look. He caught it clearly for the first time at the water fountain, when she leaned to drink, and the sleeve fell back, and the whole of the marking showed in the hard fluorescent light. He saw the recon jack, the skull, and the crossed devices worn soft with age. And beneath it, he saw the smaller mark, the specific one, the one that stopped his heart in his chest, and beneath that a short, neat row of initials. His stomach dropped through the floor. There were, on the entire earth, perhaps 200 people alive who were entitled to wear that mark. He had spent a year of his own life, the worst and best year, trying to earn the right to stand in the same room as the people who wore it. And he had come away from that year knowing that he wasn't one of them and never would be, and at peace with it, the way you make peace with a mountain you climbed part way. He did the arithmetic standing at the fountain with the water running unused over his hand. The age was right. The way she moved was right. The specific ink was not a thing you bought at a mall. It was a thing you bled for. And the row of initials beneath it was not decoration. It was a list. And he knew what kind of list it was because he carried one of his own in a place ink could not reach. He knew what the mission mark meant because he had spent the worst and best year of his life at the edge of the world those people lived in. He had not been one of them. He had been support, a young Marine who carried and drove and stood the long, boring watches, while the people with that mark on their arms went out into the dark and came back with fewer than they left with. And he had learned, that year, the exact size of the debt the rest of the service owed to the few who did that work. He had learned it, standing at the back of small rooms during the ceremonies, no one filmed. He had learned it holding one end of a flag. The debt did not fade. He had carried it for 16 years, and now it was standing at a platform in his gym in a sleeveless shirt, chalking its hands, being called the Crayon Lady by a boy who would not last one night in the country that Mark came from. And there was the one initial. He had seen it, and had not let himself believe it, the way you do not let yourself believe a thing you want too badly or fear too much. 2 small letters worn into the woman's skin, a set of initials he had carried on his own private list for 16 years, initials belonging to a Marine who had reached down into a ditch on the worst night of Ansel Rourke's life and hauled a terrified young support Marine up out of the mud and the noise and sent him running toward cover, and had then turned back toward the thing everyone else was running from. Rourke had lived because of that hand. He had gone home and grown older and made a life, and the owner of that hand had not. And now, here were his initials, on an arm in a gym, and Rourke's whole body understood before his mind would let it that there was only one person on earth who would wear that particular name, in that particular place. He needed to be sure. He would not embarrass her or himself or the memory of the dead by being almost sure. So he waited, and he watched, and the certainty built in him like water behind a wall. He tried one more time to say it plainly, to Vogt and to Tanner both. "You are mocking someone you should be studying," he said. "You are laughing at a person some of us would stand at attention to shake hands with." Tanner laughed it off a final time, because that was the only language Tanner had left himself, and Vogt frowned and said nothing, and filed that away too. Rourke and the woman crossed paths near the door as she left, and 22 years of Marine reflex nearly took him. His spine started to find the line, his chin started to lift, His whole body started to brace up in front of someone it had decided outranked every instinct he owned. She caught his eyes, and without a word, with nothing more than a look, she asked him to wait. Not yet. He held the look, and he understood it, and he let his shoulders back down, because it was not his moment to give away. It was hers. A master sergeant was nearly certain he was watching a legend get mocked by children, and the whole gym was one glance away from learning it. Subscribe to Honor Tales so that you are there when the cup hits the floor. The audience gets the rest now. The gym does not have it. But you do. Her quarters. Dusk. The light going amber and then blue in the window, the installation settling toward night. She stood at the mirror in the sleeveless shirt and looked at the ink the way a person looks at an old scar, without sentiment and without flinching, reading it the way she read it every night, top to bottom, the jack and the mark and the row of initials, and letting each letter be a face. 2010. She was 31. The team had gone deep into bad country on a long-range reconnaissance that should have stayed quiet and did not, and when it went loud all the way. And the whole of the mission after that was the oldest problem in the world, a small number of people a long way from help, and the dark full of people who wanted them dead, and a line of ground between them and the getting out that had to be paid for a meter at a time. Corporal Wendell Hoyt paid for most of it. Hoyt was 24, and he was the kind of Marine the recruiting posters would not have known how to draw, because what made him did not photograph. A steadiness, a plainness, a complete absence of the need to be seen doing the right thing. When the team had to break contact and move, someone had to be the last gun between the team and the dark, and Wendell Hoyt was the last gun, and he stayed the last gun after staying. It stopped being survivable, because staying it was the thing that bought the rest of them the meters they needed. She brought the team out. She did not leave him. The loss of him was a weight she had carried down out of that country, and had never once, in 16 years, set fully down. And she had decided long ago that she did not want to set it down, that the carrying was the point. She could still feel the specific weight of him. That was the part that never left, and the part she had stopped trying to explain to anyone a long time ago. Not the sound of that night, though she had that too, and not the pictures, though she had those. It was the weight, the particular, physical, unforgettable fact of carrying a man who had been alive that morning, of being the one whose arms and back and legs made the difference between him coming home and staying in that country forever, and of doing the arithmetic every day, since about whether she had done enough, fast enough, and never once arriving at an answer that let her rest. She had made a peace with it that was not really peace. It was more like a room she had agreed to keep a light on in. They gave her the silver star. She accepted it quietly in a small room, because refusing it would have made it about her, and it had never for 1 second been about her. And then she went and had the mark added to her arm, the mission and the men, the initials in a neat row, where she would see them every time she reached for a bar or a rifle or a cup of coffee, so that Wendell Hoyt and the others would ride with her on her own skin for whatever was left of her life. That was why a master gunnery sergeant lifted alone in the dark and let a boy laugh at her arm. The mark was never for the boy to read. The mark was a promise, and the promise had been kept every single day for 16 years, in silence, whether or not anyone in the room knew enough to understand it. The recruits thought they were mocking a costume. The audience now knows it is the map of the worst night of a legend's life, worn on purpose, every single day, in plain sight of people too young to read it. Tanner crossed the line the way she had known someone eventually would, and he crossed it with words, because words were the only weapon the boy had ever needed. It happened on the common floor during the training window, witnesses everywhere, the platoon loose and loud between events. Tanner, playing to the room, pointed at the ink on the woman's arm, and he improved his act one fatal step. He asked, grinning, whether the little letters under the skull were her imaginary friends, her make-believe squad, her pretend team. He had no idea. That was the terrible innocence of it. He had no idea that he had just pointed at a list of the dead and called them imaginary, that he had taken the names of men who had bought his freedom to stand there and run his mouth and turned them into a punchline for a laugh from Emery Nash. He did not know. Not knowing did not make it smaller. She did not flinch. The bar was in her hands, and her breathing did not change, and her face did not change, and the only thing in the whole gym that moved was Ansel Rourke, across the floor, going rigid, his jaw setting, his eyes finding hers with something like an apology and something like a plea. The room reacted unevenly, the way rooms do. A couple laughed on reflex. Someone winced and looked at the floor. Nash's grin, for the first time all week, faltered, because even Nash felt the temperature drop a degree without understanding why. And the moment lived and was witnessed and would be remembered by everyone in that bay for the rest of their careers. And not one hand had been raised. Rourke took one step toward the boy and stopped himself, because he saw, across the floor, that she had already decided something, and that whatever it was hers to do, and not his. He had spent a week wanting to end this for her. He understood, in that moment, that she did not need it ended for her, that she had been standing in the center of far worse storms than a 19-year-old's cruelty, and had learned to let them blow themselves out, and that his job, the only job she had left him with a single glance days ago, was to wait. She set the bar down. She looked at Tanner, and for the first time in the entire affair, she smiled at him. It was not anger. It was a door opening for the boy that he could not yet see. He mistook it, of course, for surrender, because surrender was the only thing his world had taught him a smile like that could mean. And he grinned back, victorious, at the woman who would not fight him. He had just made a joke of a dead man's initials in front of the whole floor, and she was smiling because now, at last, she could teach him what they meant. It broke the next morning, and it broke over a paper cup. Rourke walked the floor at 0640 with his coffee in his hand, the way he did every day, and this time his path took him close, closer than he had been, close enough that the morning light off the high windows fell full on the woman's arm as she chalked her hands. And this time he saw all of it. The jack, the mission mark, the row of initials, and one of those initials, one set of two small letters worn soft into her skin, he had known by heart for 16 years, had carried on his own list, had spoken over a flag-draped case a lifetime and a war ago. The cup opened his fingers on its own. He did not drop it so much as his hand simply forgot it, and it fell, and it struck the rubber mat and burst, and the sound of it, that small, wet slap in the church quiet of the dawn bay, turned every head on the floor. Rourke did not notice the coffee. Rourke was looking at the woman's arm like a man looking at a grave he did not expect to find. Then he found his voice, and it came out low and steady, and carried to every corner of the room, the way a quiet voice carries, when a loud room has gone silent to hear it. That is Master Gunnery Sergeant Salazar. A breath. Force reconnaissance. That mark on her arm is a mission some of us are not cleared to say out loud. And those letters she just called imaginary are men who died earning it. One of them, he said, and his voice did the smallest thing then, the only crack in it. One of them pulled me out of a ditch and did not make it out of his own. There was no formation. There was no line of Marines snapping to attention, no salute, no ceremony. There was a broken cup on a rubber mat, and a master sergeant standing over it with wet eyes, and a name, and the naming was the thunder, and it did not need anything else. The whole bay held still. 40 recruits who had spent a week learning to laugh when Tanner laughed stood now in a silence none of them had chosen, feeling the floor move under a week of easy assumptions. The names they had called her, the Crayon Lady, the Mall Ninja, hung in the air over them, and every one of them understood, at the same instant, exactly how those names would sound, played back in front of the woman Rourke had just described. Shame moves through a young crowd faster than laughter ever did. It moved through this one now, cold and total, and it landed hardest on the boy at the center of it. Tanner's face did the whole cycle. Confusion first, the frown, the head tilt, the joke still trying to hold its shape in the air. Then disbelief, as the words refused to arrange themselves into anything survivable. Then recognition, ugly and total, as he looked at the row of initials he had called imaginary, and understood that they had been men, real men, with faces and mothers and last mornings, and that he had made them into a bit. And then horror, plain and complete, as the whole of the week arrived on him at once, every dawn, every impression, every laugh, and settled on his 19-year-old shoulders with a weight he had no idea how to carry. He could not speak. He could not, in that moment, even look at the ink. The recruit who had asked if she drew it herself now could not raise his eyes to her arm at all, and she still had not raised her voice. What she did next was the thing that separated her from every lesser version of this story, and it was not punishment. She could have had the boy crushed. It would have been easy, and it would have been just, in a small way, and it would have taught him nothing. She had buried men who were worth teaching 100 of him, and she had learned from the burying that breaking a young man is the cheapest thing in the world and the most useless, and that the only thing worth the effort is the other thing, the harder thing, the thing that costs the teacher something and gives the boy a way to become worth the ground he stood on. So she stepped onto the platform. She called the recruits in, all of them, Tanner included, and she taught. The flat back, the bar over the middle of the foot, the boring, unglamorous, life-saving fundamentals that Tanner had mocked and that keep a man whole for 40 years. She was patient in a way that patience is only possible for people who have seen what the alternative costs. She corrected without shaming. She built each of them up, plate by plate, the way she built everything, in the shortest honest line from where they were to where they needed to be. And as she taught, something happened in the bay that none of them would have predicted an hour before. The recruits leaned in. They had spent a week being loud, and now they were quiet. Not the frightened quiet of the reveal, but a different quiet. The quiet of the young in the presence of the real thing, when they finally understand that the person in front of them knows something worth having and is willing to hand it over. They asked questions. They watched her hands. A discipline that no drill instructor's voice had been able to put into them settled over the platform on its own, because respect that is earned rather than demanded lands in a different and deeper place. She was not shouting. She had never once shouted. And 40 19-year-olds who had laughed at her for a week now hung on the low, even voice of a woman correcting a deadlift as if it were the most important thing they had ever been told. And for the length of that lesson, it was. Vogt had done a wrong thing for right reasons, and the correction of it did not come as a reprimand, because she did not deal in reprimands where a lesson would serve. It came as an example. He had moved her off a platform to protect his mission. Now he watched her take that same platform and make his mission better than he had known how to make it. Patiently, expertly, without once mentioning that he had been the one to send her away. That was its own kind of teaching, aimed at a 33-year-old instead of a 19-year-old, and Vogt was old enough to receive it. He would carry it. The next time a quiet person he could not place stepped onto one of his platforms, he would look twice before he moved them along, and he would remember a dawn when the rules had been perfectly followed and perfectly wrong at the same time. Staff Sergeant Marius Vogt stood at the edge of the platform and watched a master gunnery sergeant do his own job better than he had done it. And he said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and because some corrections do not need words either. And then she did the thing that finished it. She made Brody Tanner her demonstration partner. She put his hands on the bar in front of the whole platoon he had performed for, and she taught him, personally, patiently, her hands guiding his, her voice low and even, and she did not once mention the weak, and she did not once make him small. If someone in your life ever chose to teach you instead of break you when they had every right to break you, this story is for you. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stay for the ones still to come. Dakota was quiet, the way the true things in her life were always quiet. The next dawn came the way every dawn came, gray at the edges, and at 06 the Strength Bay held its church-still hush, and the woman was there at the platform, alone, chalk on the ledge, the bar already loaded, the old ink faded and unexplained on her arm in the humming light. She loaded the bar in the quiet, and for a moment she let herself feel the whole of it, the way she rarely did. The 16 years, the weight she still carried, the initials on her arm catching the first gray light, the strange long road that had brought a legend nobody recognized to a corner platform in a training base gym to teach a boy who had called her a fraud. She did not resent the road. She had stopped resenting anything a long time ago. The road was the road, and the promise was the promise, and she was here, at the iron, in the dark, keeping it, the way she had kept it every dawn for 30 years, and meant to keep it for whatever dawns were left. The door opened. Brody Tanner came in, early, on his own, before he had to be anywhere, into the hour that asks nothing of you and gives back only what you bring it. He did not say anything, because there was nothing yet that he had the right to say. He walked to a bar, and he set his feet, and he bent to it with a flat back and the bar over the middle of his foot, exactly the way she had shown him, and he pulled. She did not make a thing of it. She did not welcome him, or praise him, or acknowledge the enormous distance he had crossed to walk through that door an hour early and pick up a bar in front of the woman he had spent a week mocking. To make a thing of it would have been to make it about her again. And it was not about her. It had never been about her. It was about a boy who had been handed, by a woman he had wronged, the one gift almost no one ever hands the people who wrong them, which is a way back. He had taken it. That was all that needed to happen. And it had happened. And the rest was between him and the iron and the years ahead of him. She watched him do it. And she nodded once, the smallest nod a person can give, the same nod the janitor had given the dark 100 dawns ago, the nod that means, only I see you, and keep going. No phone lit up. No message came from a far country. No sequel waited in the dark. There was only the iron and the hour and 2 people keeping a promise to it, and the light coming up slow and clean over an installation that would never fully know what it had at the platform in the corner of its gym. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.